for the day. We've got the wonderful Jackie Dickens and Emma Towler, who are associates with the Housing Quality Networks and Housing Quality Network, and are very much sort of the experts and have helped guide me in some of the conversations around service charges. And we're really happy to have Clive Adams with us today, who's a solicitor and a partner at Burkitt. Clive heads up the housing management team there, and has provided lots of specialist advice to leaseholders and on all aspects of service charges. So we felt that the conversation may sort of stray into a bit of a legal chat. So it's brilliant to have sort of Clive here as well to chat to us and answer some of your questions, I'm sure.
Just interjecting there, Bobby, if I may, I've always acted for landlords. I don't act for leaseholders, so I act for I act for social landlords and have done throughout my professional career, and deal with things like leasehold disputes, Service 20 issues, etc. But yeah, I don't act for leaseholders. I only act for landlords.
Of course, thanks for that, Clive. Yeah, very quick on the format. Jackie's going to kick us off with a bit of with some presentations, and then we're going to move into more of a Q&A session later on. So yeah, please do sort of keep your questions if you do get a chance just to jot them down and keep them armed for later. That would be fantastic. So big thanks again to everybody for attending, and I'll hand you over to Jackie, who's going to kick us off with the first presentation.
Well, I'm not going to I'm going to go around the room and ask you to introduce yourselves, just so we can get a flavour of what's troubling you and what position your organisation is currently in with service charges with tenants primarily. I would imagine you've got it cracked with leaseholders, hopefully. So I'm going to work from the delegate list. So if I can just go through the delegate list I've got in the order that it presents itself. So your name, who you work for, your position, and what's vexing you. So if I can start with Nicholas, Arthur, is he in the room? No. Okay, Jessica Brett. Dave Chapman. Gosh, nobody here. Mark Garnham. Lee Hanson.
Hello.
Oh, excellent. Somebody's here. Lee, welcome. So we know your name now, but who do you work for and what's the problem?
So I work for Riverside Housing, and I suppose a problem we're dealing with at the moment is our supply chain. So we're doing a piece of work in terms of looking into that.
Sorry, Lee, I didn't quite catch that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can now, yeah.
No, I was saying I work for Riverside, and I suppose if we were to say one problem at the moment, it would be we've got quite a large supply chain, so we're looking into going through a tender with that.
Right, okay, thank you. Stephen Lewis?
Hello. Yes, Riverside are in full effect today. I'm afraid. I think we're comprising about 50% of the attendees.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm contract manager looking after our estate services across the business. We've got, as Lee's touched on, we've got issues with under recovery in some areas in terms of service charge. We've got a very mixed model in terms of who does what where, and that is posing a few challenges around affordability when we're looking to sort of standardise that service provision. So, for example, if you're delivering a service 6 times a year and we're looking to increase that to 20 times a year, for argument's sake, there's a fairly obvious sort of cost implication there for customers. And yeah, there's a number of there's a fair bit for us to do, it's fair to say.
Right. Right. Okay, thank you. Rizwana.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Rizwan. I work for Riverside, and I work under Steve Lewis. It's exactly what Stephen just said.
Right, okay, thanks. I think we're going to get the same from Richard, Lisa and Thomas, because you're all from Riverside. There's probably no bottoms sitting on seats for Riverside. Hope the customers are daft. Okay, Laura Branthwaite.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Very much so, thanks Laura.
Yeah, so I'm Laura Branthwaite. I'm the Estates Contract Manager for the Guinness Partnership. I look after the estates contractors across the partnership nationally. We have a mixed model of service delivery for estate services. So we have in-house teams as well as contractors. Over the last few years, we've gone through the process probably similar to what Stephen's talking about. So we're pretty much at the end of that process now, where we've gone down from lots and lots of different suppliers nationally to just a few delivering services across the country. And I guess I'm quite interested to see the difference in service charge recovery across different housing associations where they've got mixed model of delivery.
Okay, thanks Laura. Caroline Russell. No? Okay. Helena Pountney.
Good morning. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties earlier, so I've dropped into this conversation and I'm picking up that we're doing a little bit of an introduction about who we are and what we're doing. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So I'm Helena Pountney. I'm from BPHA. I'm actually the Regional Housing Manager. However, I have been tasked with looking at our whole estate services and looking at how we can improve them in the sense of looking at more bespoke offering in certain areas to particular schemes as well. So it's for me, it's quite a complex working with our property services department as well. We are mainly contractually based, so we have external contractors, a few external contractors. We rely very much on them. We do have some on-site caretaking staff as well, but we have similar issues to what I've just been hearing from the previous speakers around service charge recovery, and also a big issue for us is particularly around management companies, where we have management companies, particularly on our new build developments, very complex, very difficult, and trying to align that estate service aspect with the communication with our customers so that they understand it as well. So quite a lot going on for me at the minute. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Helena. Claire James.
Hi, so Helena's just updated, so I don't really need to. So I'm Claire James, I'm the Rent and Service Charge Manager at BPHA. Hi Jackie, nice to see you again.
Hi.
So yeah, I'll be working with Helena really on what we're doing, what we're offering our residents. So for me, the biggest thing, I've only been at BPHA 15 months, is that we still operate a pooled service charge across all of our stock. So it's whether one of the things we'll be doing is looking at what it would look like if we did depool. So regardless of where our residents are, they all pay the same for grounds maintenance. So we're kind of at the beginning, I think, of where Guinness might now be at the end of it. So it's just really whether you found any benefit in depooling. I know you've got that fair and reasonableness from the residents, but from a business point of view, has there been much benefit?
Right,
So, yeah,
okay. Thanks very much, Claire. David Wrigley.
Morning, everyone. David Wrigley, I'm head of neighbourhood homes in Oldham. Yeah, service charges. Well, I wanted to invite my board this morning to this meeting just to get them. So I'm obviously fighting the corner of estate services. At First Choice Homes Oldham, a decision was made a number of years ago to cap service charges to no more than £5.
What?
I know, Jackie. So that don't get you a caretaker these days. So at the start of a process to realign, review, decide what we do as an organisation, never mind just in estate services, because decisions were made around grounds maintenance service charges previously. So yeah, very much of a journey, as they say.
I think their ears are pricking up thinking, oh, First Choice Homes are up for grabs shortly because they're they're not going to be able to survive.
Oh no, we're very cash rich apparently,
That's probably
which makes it even more suspicious, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We won't go there. Okay, thanks a lot, David. Stephen Hurst. This is the guy who looks after the money. Is he in the room, Stephen?
He's not in the room yet. He must be counting it again today.
Must be counting it. Okay. All right. Justin Gibbs.
Good morning, Jackie, and good morning all. Justin Gibbs, Tenancy Services Manager at Great Yarmouth Borough Council. Estate Services comes within the portfolio of services that I sort of manage and lead. And in respect to service charges, we have a service charge approach for our in-house caretaking team, but our wider estate services that are delivered through our joint venture company are basically paid for by all tenants through the HRA. So we're looking to introduce service charges in that area. So just very interested to sort of hear the conversations this morning.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Justin. Kate Ford.
Hello, I am very new to the area of leasehold and service charges. I'm a continuous improvement manager for Stevenage Borough Council, and I've been tasked with being the project manager for our service charge review. We did get HQN in a good number of years ago now, about 4 years ago.
I know, I was one of them.
Yep, and I'm reading through that paper now, and we're finally starting to consider those and bring forward those proposals. But of course, it's now 4 years out of date. So I'm trying to increase my knowledge, get an understanding of the current conversations that are taking place so I can factor all of that in as part of our service charge review.
Yeah, well, you've answered the question that I was going to ask you. So yeah, whatever happened to that work? Yeah, okay, thanks, Kate. Caroline Martindale. No, Ian Jardine.
Morning all.
Morning.
I work for London Borough of Redbridge and Environmental Services Manager, and part of my portfolio is caretaking and grounds maintenance services. Our main issue, tenant service charges are fine, not really any problems with that, is really we have numerous different leases that I think are quite poor in a lot of sections, so we're sort of under recovering quite substantially from our leaseholders. I think we've got a very good business model that's been tried and tested and challenged at previous LVT, but I just really wanted to see maybe how some of the people who probably have got the same issues as us, a sort of whether there's a plan or a way that we can get around them, or you know, is there any method for recovering in those areas?
Right, okay, that's an interesting one. So really your main concern is about leaseholder service charge recovery, not the tenants. You're almost in the wrong room. Anyway, we'll can address that. That's not a problem. Sarah Hendry. Thanks, Ian. Thank you. Sarah Hendry.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I've got workmen in the house and I've tried to put my headphones in, but it's not working. So if you hear the noise in the background, many apologies. I work for Habentech Housing. We operate pretty much all across the UK over 86 local authority areas. We have, like many others, it's quite difficult to manage that because we have to have a high volume of local contracts to manage, you know, service chargeable recovery items. For me, although I've worked in housing for a very long time, service charges isn't something that I've had to really focus on. And what I would say is I don't have a strong knowledge base, which is why I'm here today. My managers probably know more than me. And I think for me, it's making sure, because we do a review of service charges every year, but it's making sure that we're charging and recovering what we should be, you know, everything that we should be recovering, because there's been a couple of anomalies for me where I think we shouldn't be recovering that charge. The other thing is we've obviously lost a lot of SP contracts, and I just want to know about want to maybe learn a little bit about how we can look at enhancing that and maybe reducing the cost to the tenants, but recovering that through either housing benefit or UC, through making it more eligible.
Right, okay. Okay, thanks, Tara. Jackie Cohen.
Hello, everybody. I'm
Hi.
Jackie. I work at Taurus. Previously, we were 3 separate housing associations amalgamated into one. So therefore, we've got 3 different charges for estate charges with different specifications. So we're going to be doing a full service charge review of all 10 years. Probably going to take us over the next 2 years, where we want to align all the charges. So hence why we've jumped onto this to try and get as much information as we can, really. But we're just at the very beginning of it. We haven't consulted or done anything yet. So.
Okay, thanks very much. Paula Underwood.
Hi, I'm Paula Underwood, and I'm also from Taurus as well. So I don't want to repeat what Jackie's just said. So I'm group head of support network. So a lot of the service charges sit within my service area. So we're looking to review, obviously, service charges in terms of extra care, sheltered housing, supported housing, as well as all of our general needs blocks as well.
Right, okay, thank you. Sarah Rennie.
Hello, I'm Sarah Rennie. I work for Winchester City Council. I'm a finance officer for development. I'm fairly new to the role, so we've lost a lot of knowledge, so just trying to get myself back up to speed.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Joanna Connolly.
Hi, sorry, it took me a minute to unmute there. Hi, yeah, Jo Connolly from EMH Homes. I'm a housing and neighbourhood manager who is lead for estate services. A bit like Helena, really, is we're getting lots of new builds at the minute, and it's that balance of estate services and management company. And, you know, when you've got so many management companies as well, and as well, value for money, I think is quite important. We're going through a 5-year plan for service charges, and one of the things that we picked up was, you know, numerous repairs on the same door being carried out time and time again, and hiking those up. So I'm interested in how people are dealing with that. So that's me.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Jo. Natalie Waters.
Hi, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. So myself and my colleague Sam Bainbridge are new to this, as in your estate group. I'm responsible for all of tenant services, including income collection, sheltered, everything basically. But for us, we made a decision not to depool our rents. And over the recent years, we varied our tenancy agreement to allow us to implement service charges. And at the moment, we only charge for landlord lighting and landlord cleaning, but they are minimal charges, so they're not the actual cost. And then we don't charge for anything else, but obviously provide services for everything else. So we're just keen to learn whatever we can about how we can look at improving that.
Okay, all right, thanks. Thank you. Sam, because we want to get through this. Kate Innes.
Hiya, my name's Kate Innes. I work for Alliance Homes, and we have a mix of fixed charges, variable charges, and quite a lot of people who have capped charges as part of development agreements. And the services that are delivered are, we have external contracts, but also we have a direct labour force that do a lot of our like servicing elements. So I should say my role is rent and service charge manager. So a colleague that works in the estate services team sent me having really are that now the service charge team has moved on and we are recovering the things that we are able to evidence. What we're finding is the estate services are delivering all these lovely services, but actually quite a lot of them aren't service charge recoverable, and the evidence that they're providing us isn't very clear, and so that makes it, you know, we can't charge it onto our tenants, and so we need to work with them to improve that and to make the organisation to understand that this sort of general thing that we are under recovering service charges, actually we've been charging historically for services that shouldn't be service chargeable.
Oh,
right.
Yeah,
okay.
so
that's where we're at.
Yeah, swings and roundabouts. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Hi, yeah, sorry. My name's Paul Connolly. I'm the head of rent and service charge at the Guinness Partnership. Probably just to mirror what a couple of others have said, really. New developments becoming more and more complex, more and more expensive. And it's that battle between kind of affordability and being able to sort of sell the units and what services are being delivered and make sure we're recovering. It's proven a bit of a challenge at the moment. And also kind of similar to what Kate said, really, we operate fixed and variable service charges. We've got a lot and lots of legacy tenancy agreements. And at the moment, we're in a position where we're delivering services and we're not sure whether or not it's actually within the tenancy agreement that we should or not. There was also a determination last year at the upper tribunal against us around where we've got a very vague service charge provision for things like, for just anything. We got ruled as it being non-recoverable. So it was for bulk refuse collection. And we were told because it wasn't specified within the tenancy agreement's provisions, that's it, we couldn't recover it. And it's just, has anyone else got that experience or, you know, having those same issues at the moment?
Okay, that's an interesting one, isn't it? You know, the tenancy agreement, like the lease, is a contract, and yet we tippy-toe around leases because we just think it's more legally weighted than a tenancy agreement. Well, no, the tenancy agreement is a contract as well. And I think it's just that lots of organisations have managed to get away with doing what they like because the tenants have just never challenged. Caroline, you've got your hand up there.
Hi, yeah, I'm Caroline Russell. I didn't know I'd put my hand up, sorry. I'm the Landlord Services Manager at Warwick District Council, and my team provides all services for all landlords, leaseholders, sheltered tenants, as well as general needs. We do not really provide any, we do not charge any service charges for any tenants, but we do for leaseholders. And well, it bothers me that we don't and that we don't do it properly. And we are going through a review of our tenancy agreement, and whilst we're doing that review of tenancy agreement, we're going to include provision for service charges. Just got to move away from the washing machine, sorry. So yeah, that's why I've joined today, really.
Right. Okay. Well, you've all thrown things. We have got slides, and slides cover a little bit of a repeat for those people who were with us last year. Repeats because we've got new people in the room, and then we're moving on to looking at depooling and just depooling. What's the other thing, Emma, that we're looking at? Depooling and
introducing services, tenancy agreements, all of that sort of thing.
Variable and fixed, yeah. But there are some things that you've mentioned here today, like managing agents, new developments, which aren't covered on the slides. But we've got a fair chunk of the day where we can do Q&A. So that's fine. Whatever your queries are, we'll try and address them as far as possible. So without further ado, Emma's going to share the slides in a moment. She's going to be my Chris Whitty equivalent. I'm going to say next slide, please, and all of that. And we will have breakout rooms. We'll go into the slides a little bit now, and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms so you can chat amongst yourselves. When we hold these events in a function room in a hotel or whatever, you know, we have a break for coffee and you all chat amongst yourselves over the coffee machine with your Danish pastry. Of course, we're not in a function room, so we're going to take you into a breakout room, which is next best equivalent. We've only got about, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour's worth of slides, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So next slide, please, Emma. So we're just going to take it back to what we talked about last year. What is a service charge? I'm not going to give you the legal definition. The legal definition is in that second bullet, section 18 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985. In fact, if you want to know what the framework is for service charges and you are in lockdown, you've got nothing better else to do, section 18 to 30 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 85 is the Bible, is the go-to place for everything great and good about service charges. But if you just think it basic, on a basic term, a service charge is designed to allow the landlord, i.e. you guys, to collect the money for the payment of those services that you have to provide in the lease or the tenancy agreement. And it's interesting that Guinness got tripped up at the tribunal with regards to, you know, the tenancy agreement being silent on certain services. Tenancy agreements should have a schedule attached or should have the words written into the contract about what you as a landlord is going to provide as a service. And it should be explicit in the same way as we say it should be explicit in the lease. Equally, it should be explicit in the tenancy agreement. Sadly, increasingly, more and more landlords are getting tripped up because their tenancy agreement is not as robust as perhaps the lease, and even the leases aren't that great, might be. So the first thing is obviously to revisit your tenancy agreements. Okay, next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. So again, I was listening to people talking about pooled and depooled, and anybody, and I know we've got a couple of new people fresh into service charges in the room, never visited or faced them before. So what are we talking about when we're talking about pooled and depooled services? If you've got pooled services, Warwick, you've said that you're not charging your tenants for services. That's because it's pooled in the rent. So when you get your rent, you actually have to take out of that rental income to pay any external contractors. So if you imagine every single service that you provide is provided by somebody outside of your organisation. With local authorities, that doesn't normally happen, but utilities, it's the electricity board or the water board. You might engage an external gardener or an external cleaning company. You might bring in consultants to do your fire risk assessments. To pay all of those services, you have to take the money out of the rent. Okay. Over the last few years, we're out of it now, but over the last few years, all providers have had to reduce the rent by 1%. So you can imagine how that looks. The rent is going down, your gross rent is going down. You've still got to pay for those services, and those services have been going up. The cost of those services have been going up. So it's a bit like that. So you haven't been recovering what you need to pay your services. So your rent revenue, your HRA revenue has been squeezed over the last few years. We're out of it, as I've said, this is the first year we're out of it. But still, if you're pooled, then you've still got that issue about taking the money out of that rent. So in an ideal world, you would want to be depooled. It's more transparent anyway, and your finance department can see the wood for the trees. Next slide, please, Anna. So that's what pooled and depooled. What do we mean by fixed and variable? What does actually that mean? So let me draw a picture for you. Okay, so at the beginning of the financial year, leases, by the way, are generally variable, but tenancy agreements might be variable, might be fixed. What does it look like? At the beginning of the year, you say to your residents, we estimate the service charge to be £500. You get to the end of the financial year, you're crunching the numbers, or your finance department or somebody is crunching the numbers, and oops, you've spent more money than the £500. You've spent £600. In a variable scenario, you would write to your leaseholders and your tenants and say, we said we were going to spend £500, actually we spent £600, here's a balancing demand for the other £100. With leaseholders, you would expect them to pay within whatever the terms of the lease, usually 28 days, that balancing demand. And with tenants, you'll do one of two things. You'll either spread it over the remaining 6 months of the year, or you'll incorporate it in the following financial year's charges, and you'll recover it that way. But it's still a variable because you're still recovering the overspend. Equally, if you've underspent, you don't have to give the money back. With a fixed scenario, sorry, that's on a fixed scenario, you don't give the money back and you don't recover the overspend. With a variable, you can recover, but you would also have to give the money back. The reason why people would want to move to variable is because it's clearly you can recover all of the costs of your services. Also in year, you might be more willing to change your services, increase frequencies, because you know at the end of the year, you might have spent more money, but it doesn't matter, you're on variable, you can recover those costs. Some organisations are not shifting to variable simply because if they do with tenancies, it might mean that they fall under Section 20, or rather, if the cost limits of Section 20 consultation are reached, then you've got variable tenants paying a variable service charge, they will be captured by the Section 20 consultation regime. And that usually applies to qualifying long-term agreements, those type of costs. So that's variable and fixed and pooled and depooled. Just before we move on to the next slide, are there any questions on that? Does anybody want to raise any questions about fixed and variable, pooled and depooled that I haven't made it clear?
Sorry? You're saying we do fixed at the moment, and we estimate it, you know, obviously when we're setting budgets, we're looking at what we spent previous year and fixing it again for the next year. And you said that you don't have to give the money back if you've underspent. But if we've charged for something that we shouldn't have charged, i.e., say we charge them for maintenance of a, I don't know, a hoist or something, but they haven't got a hoist in the property because that's our error. We have to provide them a refund on that, don't we? Even if we've estimated that there would be charge.
I didn't quite catch that. I'm awfully sorry.
Right. Again, this is I'm really not great with service charges, but if we do fixed at Havintech and we estimate based on previous year spend and we forecast what we're going to spend, right. But you're saying that you don't have to give the money back if you've underspent, but if you've not provided them with a service that you've anticipated, is that you still don't have to issue them a refund?
Jackie, the example that Sarah gave was charging for a hoist that isn't in the property.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's your area, Emma. I'm going to hand that one over to you.
And I think under those circumstances, absolutely, if you charge for something that the tenant simply doesn't have the benefit of, then yes, absolutely, you would be refunding that because it's a service charge that you shouldn't have been recovering.
Yeah, well, we have been doing that. I think it was just because you said if you've underspent and you've estimated and fixed it, that you don't have to give the money back. I was wondering whether we were missing a trick.
No,
yeah.
Really not.
Yeah, I think it's more about the types of cleaning, gardening. It's very rare that people underspend, actually. It's usually the other way around, but it's the likes of the cleaning and gardening where you've over-calculated and you wouldn't give the money back in those scenarios. But you're quite right. If you've just provided, you know, you've clearly not given a service that was put into the service charge schedule, then that would be paid back, not the services that you are providing, you just over-calculated, if that makes sense. Jackie, you've got a question, or you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just a quick one, really. You know, if we have fixed service charges at the moment, is all that happens is that CPI at September, they just apply that inflationary rate every year. Whereas I kind of think that we should be reviewing them every year, not just applying this CPI as of September. Would you agree if the best practice would be to review them each year?
Absolutely. Fixed service charges doesn't mean you just add inflation to the charges. You can base the charges for 21-22 on what you spent in 1920, for example. So fixed doesn't mean they're fixed in stone forever. You can each year review what you spent a couple of years previously and use that to inform what you're going to be charging in the coming year. But
And if you would
obviously,
ever
sorry.
if you were ever challenged and you'd only applied this percentage increase, do you think it wouldn't look good, or?
It definitely wouldn't look good.
I think it would be.
Okay,
It would
good.
make it more difficult to justify the costs that you've put in to the service charge, because you don't know how that relates to reality.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
And
also, Jackie, if I could just sort of just jump in on a couple of points there. If you're applying a CPI in terms of if you're challenged, if your charges are merely a base plus a percentage uplift, I mean that is undoubtedly a fixed service charge, because there's no link, there's no correlation between what you spend and the amount of the charge. So in terms of being challenged, the tribunal would not have jurisdiction to listen to any challenge, because it's not a service charge by definition. There has to be a direct correlation between what is spent and the amount of the charge. So doing it as a CPI is fine. It makes your charges in a way unchallengeable. What I think the risk is there's then a very severe chance that the costs of delivery will start to way outstrip the amount that you're actually recovering. So you'll be having a massive under recovery. Now, as Emma said, what you can do is you can look at your charges from previous years to inform, but you must be very, very careful not to start charging last year's actuals, because if you do that, then there then becomes a direct correlation between what you spend and the amount of the charge, and whether you then intend to operate a fixed service charge, it becomes variable by definition. So yes, you can be informed by what you spent, but the estimate cannot simply be last year's charge. You have to be very, very careful on how you're doing it. What you're doing currently, you will not be challenged, because it is truly a fixed charge if it just simply gets inflated year on year.
By not being challenged, Clive, means that you can't go to the first tier tribunal. It doesn't stop your tenants making complaints about it and you needing to justify it. So there is more than one way to be challenged.
Yeah, and I just worry also about that challenge, not tribunal challenge, the reputational damage and the lack of transparency. It is. I think that's more of a risk as well. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, any other questions on fixed and variable, pooled and depooled before we move on?
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask a quick question? Does anybody else discount or cap variable service charges in line with the rent standards statement about endeavouring to keep charges within CPI +1?
I'm not aware of anyone, but
has anybody, I don't know, had any experience of that statement within the rent standard and having to kind of come up with an approach for it, or is it a
yes, I have. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm from Sovereign. I'm rent and service charge manager. So we do provide capping on our variable service charges for tenants that we won't increase by more than £3 per week compared with the previous year's estimate. There are some exclusions around that for brought forward balances and for some of our special facilities around concierge services and also around private charges as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please, Emma. So just another mention on fixed and variable leases, as I mentioned before, are usually provide for a variable service charge. We're not seeing I don't think I've seen any leases actually with a fixed service charge. But tenancy agreements, if you've got variable term in a tenancy agreement, it probably will include words that talk about the frequency of the variation, the basis for calculating the service charge, method of apportioning the variation, and method of dealing with surpluses of deficits. They're typical wording that you might have in a tenancy agreement. Another slide, please, Emma. Okay, so I'm going to break you into breakout rooms so you can all have a little chat amongst yourselves. We're going to do it automatic, or rather the computer's going to do it automatically. Just a couple of can openers there for you to think about, whether your organisation operates a variable or fixed service charge, and what problems does it present for you. Do tenants understand the fixed or the variable? And then looking at pooled and depooled, if you've gone from pooled to depooled, what did you do? What impact did it have on the service charge? And how did you phase in the increase? Because inevitably there would be an increase. So Beth, hopefully, is somewhere lurking in the background, and she's going to pop in and send you into breakout rooms. If you've never been into a breakout room before, it's quite a strange feeling. You're whisked through the air, a bit like is it Doctor Who? He goes, moves. Where is she? Where's Beth?
Hi folks, so just so you know, you won't have access to this slide when you go out into your breakout rooms. So it might be a good idea to just write down the questions or screenshot them, just so you'll be able to see them before you go into the room. Emma, would we be able to just bring the slide back up quickly? Thank you. So if people just want to screenshot that or write it down just before I put you in the breakout rooms.
It's not an instruction. You can chat about anything, you know, what you have for breakfast. It really is just for you to have that chat over the coffee experience.
Okay. Perfect. So you should all be receiving a notification now. So you just need to click join the breakout room and it should put you in there automatically now. Okay, that's everyone back now.
Okay, well, I hope you had a good old chat. I'm not going to ask you for your feedback. That was just for you to have a get to know each other and find out what you're each doing in different organisations. So Emma, if I could have the last few slides before I hand over to you. Okay, so this case, Curo versus Pimlet, back in 2019. I put it up. Clive is going to unpick it a little bit further when he comes into the room, or rather takes over. But for me, it just sent shivers down my spine when I first read it. So, weekly assured tenancy, and this is a case of a retirement scheme. Okay, so Mr. Pimlet is a pensioner in one of Curo Place's retirement homes. He's on a weekly assured tenancy agreement, but the tenancy agreement didn't make mention of grounds maintenance in the list of the services attached to the schedule, or the schedule attached to the tenancy agreement. Curo, though, were carrying out grounds maintenance, okay, and they weren't charging him. They were carrying out the grounds maintenance, wasn't mentioned in the tenancy agreement. Landlord then decided what they had also been doing every time they granted a new tenancy agreement, when anybody left the building and there was a void and a re-grant, they granted a different tenancy agreement that did actually include grounds maintenance in the schedule, but Mr. Pimlet's didn't, and he's one of the older residents there. And then they decided that they wanted to collect for the grounds maintenance. They weren't recovering all of their costs, and they wanted to now charge Mr. Pimlet. But Mr. Pimlet, probably not Mr. Pimlet, probably his son or his daughter or somebody else in the background, decided that no, this wasn't on. So it went to the tribunal, and the tribunal decided that just because the tenancy agreement didn't mention it, the Curo couldn't just say that it wanted to apply an additional service. It can't be an extra service if it's a service that's been delivered for years and years and years. And even though the assured tenancy agreement did have a UVP, a universal variation provision, Even if they could use that UVP to introduce the service, the landlord Curo still couldn't introduce the charge because the tenancy agreement didn't talk about grounds maintenance as being provided. Remember what I said at the beginning, that a tenancy agreement is a contract just like a lease is a contract. And this for variable service charges, under that section 18 to 30 of the Landlord and Tenant Act, section 19 talks about charges being reasonably incurred. So we all know, or most of us know if we're in the leasehold world, that unless the lease talks about a particular service being provided, the landlord being obliged to provide the service, you can't charge for something that the landlord's not obliged to do. And in this Curo place, tenancy agreement didn't talk about grounds maintenance as being a service that Curo was obliged to provide or would provide, and therefore they couldn't charge for that grounds maintenance service. I think Clive is going to add a little bit more to that basic understanding of that case, but that's it as I understand it. So if I can go on to the next.
Sorry, yeah. Jackie, can I just ask a question then? So in terms of the tenancy agreement, so we're talking about the schedule, aren't we, rather than the actual tenancy agreement making those references?
Yeah.
So, say, for example, garden maintenance isn't listed on the schedule. By consultation and giving people notice, could you apply that charge the year after?
Okay, it depends on which tenancy agreement you've got. If you've got a secure tenancy agreement or a assured tenancy agreement. Emma is best placed with.
We're going to cover that in a minute.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
and it is on the next few slides. So hopefully we'll address that.
Okay, thank you.
And if I Paula can just answer what you said. And Curo did exactly that. They did consult. They did lovely consultation. But their tenancy agreements, and it's all down to what your tenancy says. But in this particular case, their tenancy agreement said we may provide extra services if we believe this would be useful. So that was the term that they were trying to use to add in supposedly a grounds maintenance service and charge for it, when in fact the grounds maintenance service had always been provided because it was a stock transfer tenancy and had been provided without a charge for it being rendered. So they were saying, right, we're going to use this, we're going to consult with you, we'll do all of that. The tribunal said, well, your contract doesn't allow you to do this because it only allows you, the provision you're trying to rely on is we may provide an extra service. This is not an extra service. It has always been provided for free, so it's not extra. And that was it was very much on the wording of what the tenancy says. So in answer to your question, well, could they have consulted? They did, but it was down to what the tenancy agreement says. So the answer to yours would be you'd have to look at your tenancy agreement very carefully and see what the contractual provisions provided for.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I come back to what I said right at the beginning, that clarity, that we often, I think landlords, I say get away with it. They've not really understood, I don't think, the contractual weight of a tenancy agreement in the same way as they do understand the contractual weight of a lease. And that's why, leasehold management, people sort of, oh, no, I don't want anything to do with leasehold management because that's all very legal and hot potatoes and, all of that. And tenancy agreements, high turnover tenancies, and tenants don't query. They're very grateful for what they get, generalising, by the way, here. And so therefore there's not as much focus given to it. And I think now there should, or not now, but there should be always. Anyway,
Jackie, sorry, Jackie, can I just ask on that also, if we had some vague reference to recovering service charges in a tenancy agreement, so I think of a lease, and a lot of the leases will say we'll recover what we've reasonably incurred, and that doesn't give you doesn't allow you to recover what you want, but it gives you some vagaries in which to start recovering costs. something similar in a tenancy agreement, would that be acceptable, or do you need to be super specific about the services being delivered?
You should be super specific.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then it's explicit, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Emma, if I may have the next slide, please. Okay, we often think about service charges when we think about flats, because you've got block costs, you've got mechanical and electrical costs, but you've got houses that are being bought under the right to buy or the right to acquire, and now a number of you have mentioned that you are now developing on estates where there might be a third party managing agent. You may have flats, but you may also have houses there. Let me just give you a little bit of history as to why right to buy and right to acquire houses may not be paying a service charge, particularly local authorities who have still got their stock. It will resonate for those housing associations who've taken stock transfer. So what typically would happen with an estate, and this would also go for flats being sold on the right to buy and the right to acquire, they may not have an estate service charge. They may just have a block service charge. And the reason there was no estate service charge is because the estate costs would be met by the general fund, actually council tax. So you've got an estate, Joe Bloggs can walk through the estate. I'm Joe Bloggs, I live off the estate. I walk through the estate to get to the bus stop to take me into my work. My children play in the play area on the estate, but my children don't live on the estate. It's open to people just to walk through. There's no gate either end of the estate. That's why it was fair that it should be the general fund that would meet the costs of mowing the grass, of tending to the repairs on the play area, etc. So that's why you'll find that right to buy, right to acquire houses are not required to make any contribution to an estate cost, and likewise some of the flats don't either. But of course then local authorities transferred their stock to housing associations. Housing associations don't have the benefit of the general fund. They've got a contractor that they have to pay. And where are they getting the money from? There's no provision in the right to buy sale. They're stuffed, basically. It's a very technical professional word for not recovering all of your money. So you now have housing associations who've got estates that they've taken from a local authority where they may be exercising or carrying out processing right to buy applications, and they may be requiring those freeholders to contribute to estate costs that they've now got to pay out for. So you'll have two owners living next door to each other, one bought when it was owned by the local authority with no requirement to pay, and one who's now being asked by the housing association who's taken stock transfer. And unfortunately, they talk over the garden fence. And one finds that they're paying and one finds they're not paying. And then the phones are hot, aren't they? And you've got to answer the reason why. One was in the right place at the right time and the other one, fortunately, wasn't. So that's the background to it. And of course, now you've got these Section 106 arrangements where, again, you've got the estate is unadopted, so the local authority isn't maintaining the roads or the footpaths, the lighting, etc. And currently, as we stand, there's no regulation over what third-party managing agents are charging for those estate costs. If you are in a Section 106 arrangement, by the way, does everybody in the room understand the term Section 106?
Yeah.
Please speak.
No.
No, good, okay.
No.
Well, I'm just going to do it in a few sentences because it's too big a subject. Large piece of land, Barrett's or Bellways or Lovells, one of them buys the large piece of land. gets their people to work it up into some sort of design with lots of houses and roads and flat blocks of flats, etc. Submits the plans to the local authority, planning department have got regulations that they have to abide by, but section 106 within those regulations gives them flexibility to say to Lovells or Barratts or whatever, because of our own plans, our own density in the area, we're in a city centre or we're not, or we're in the countryside, depending on their own plans, they say, yes, I like your design, but I'd also like a play area, or I'd also like a doctor's surgery, or I'd also like, one of the things that they usually like is that a percentage of the residential is given over to social housing. And that percentage is dictated by the density of the proposal and the area that they're working in. And so Lovells, in order to satisfy that requirement, that planning section 106 requirement, looks for a partner. And it's usually a housing association and actually increasingly local authorities. And in order to satisfy that percentage, the HA will probably buy a row of houses, or they may buy a long lease, a head lease on a block of flats, and under it they will create tenancies or shared ownership properties. But those houses and those people in those flats where the HA has bought them are required to pay a third-party managing agent. So you might be in bed, as it were, with a third-party managing agent, and you've got to pay an estate charge. It's an estate charge, not a service charge in the definition that we understand a service charge. Yeah, and I'd actually veer away from the word service charge because that suggests protection. And there is no protection currently at the moment on these estate charges. I think it's round the corner, the protections, because there are so many out there, but it's not there yet. Any questions on that arrangement? No. Okay, moving swiftly on. So fixed, variable, pool, depooled, what's happening out in the big wide world? Well, providers are shifting towards having variable service charges and shifting to depooling of service costs, particularly when they crunch the numbers. They look at, we call it looking under the bonnet. So you look at you need to work with your finance department, you look at the cost of all of your services, and then you look at what you charge out to your tenants and your leaseholders, and then you see the mismatch, the difference in the under recovery, and that's your argument for your managers, your supervisors, your directors, possibly the councillors, MPs in the area. You've still got your limitations of your leases and your tenancy agreements. Leases are almost in tablets of stone, by the way. Tenancy agreements are not so much because you do have a higher turnover. So you might need to do something about the tenancy agreements. Consultation, think about the Curo, think about the wording. Emma, over to you.
A quick question.
Right, so Clive and I are going to cover a number of topics, some looking at some of what Jackie said in a bit more detail. So we're going to look at introducing a service charge for a service you're already providing, introducing new services, depooling, and moving between fixed and variable. So I'll hand over to you, Clive, and you're on mute.
Indeed I am, thank you. Okay, so first and foremost, as I've already mentioned in answering some of the questions, this is all about contractual rights. The tenancy agreement is a contract. There's a fundamental principle in English law that you cannot unilaterally vary a contract because it just simply be unfair to do so. But there are statutory exceptions to that. One being for an assured tenancy, for example, sections 13 and 14, which enables you to vary the rent. You can also vary the service charge, the amounts payable for the service charge as a contractual provision. So in terms of including extra services, so you can change the cash. Section 13 allows you to change the cash. Section 13 doesn't allow you to change the terms of the service, i.e. by adding in a new service that you're not otherwise providing. So it's all about, well, how would you then simply do that? Well, if you've the first step is always going to be to have a look at what the contract says, and have you included a provision in the contract that would enable you either to add a service in, and we'll look at how you would do that in light of the Curo and Pimlet decision, or as Jackie said, is your service charge clause of what you're providing, does it either include it already because you've got a very encompassing schedule at the back, or conversely, is it so vague that virtually anything you do could be covered? So you've almost got that there's advantages for being very vague, there's advantages for being very specific. Most people sit somewhere in the middle, and in a way that's the worst of both worlds. If the charge is allowable in the tenancy agreement, maybe you say, we'll provide the following services, and you might have cleaning, grounds maintenance, caretaking service, etc. But at the start of the tenancy, the caretaking service was estimated to be 0. So you can have services, but the charge next to it is stated as a 0. Then what you're doing is simply changing the cash. You're not adding a service in as such, because contractually it was there before. You had ticked the box that this is one of the services that you may be able to provide in the future. So contractually it's incorporated into the contract, but simply at the start it was a 0 charge. Now for that, when you then come to your February time and you're then looking at reviewing the rent, reviewing the service charge, it simply goes from 0 to whatever the charge may be, 0 to 10. Going from 0 to 10 is just as easy as if it was going from, say, £8 to £10. Okay, that's just simply changing the cash. So what if there was no service included if the service you wish to include was not mentioned in the list of services at all? So Sarah, put your hand up.
Sorry, that was earlier, so carry on.
Okay. Sorry, I got like a doorbell sound and then I saw this hand come up, so apologies. So if the service is within the contract, but it was simply described as 0, then that's very easy to do. But what if you're in that halfway house where you haven't got an all-encompassing list of services and you only mention 2 or 3 things and you now want to add a new service in, or as in the Curo position, you're already providing for it, but you've never charged for it. So what do you do for those cases? Well, for local authorities, the government's made it easy for you. So if we're a local authority tenancy, you have to follow the Section 103 procedure. So the section before that, Section 102 of the Housing Act 85 says, a secure tenancy can be changed in one of 3 ways. By landlord and tenant agreeing variation, if it relates to a change in the rent and service charge, or by following the Section 103 procedure. The 103 procedure requires the local authority to serve a notice informing the tenant of the intention to vary. It sets out what the proposed variation is, what its effect is likely to be, and then invites the tenants to respond within what is described as a reasonable period of time. Doesn't define what reasonable is. Within a reasonable period of time to then comment on the proposals. Whether the tenants, they may universally say, we don't want it. There's nothing within the procedure that says it has to be consensual. As long as you follow this process through, you can force something on them whether the tenants want it or not. So for the local authority, by following this procedure, of course, you would be considering responses, but you're then able to exercise your own decision to put in a variation. You would then serve a document known as the notice of variation, which then specifies what the variation is going to be. and the date on which it takes effect. For a local authority, say you've got a statutory power to pretty much do whatever you want. What is harder is then when it comes to look at registered providers. What some registered providers have tried to do in the second bullet point down there, in the case of Peabody and Reeves, all the way back in 2008, Peabody sought to incorporate as a matter of contract the Section 103 procedure. It was in their tenancy agreement that it said we can vary any of the terms of this agreement by following the Section 103 statutory route. It was challenged. What happened? The High Court said, no, if Parliament had intended you to benefit from Section 103, Parliament would include an equal provision within the Housing Act 88, which Parliament did not. And secondly, by including a clause which enables you to change any part of the contract at all at your whim would be void for breaching the unfair terms in consumer contract regulations. In effect, it would be an unfair term. So they weren't allowed to do it. Now, you've then got to look at, well, if you've then got would what Jackie describes as a unilateral variation clause, would a provision that enables you to add, remove, reduce or vary services, would that be caught by the Peabody and Reeves decision? Now, I don't think it would. There's never been a Peabody and Reeves was 2008, so we're looking at 12, coming up to 13 years ago. Having a provision that enables you to change the services, where Peabody went wrong, is they tried to include a unilateral variation clause for which they could change any term at all, absolutely anything. And that it was because it could change anything, it was held to be an unfair contract term. Just having a provision that says we can change the services we provide for purposes of good housing management, I don't think would infringe the Unfair Contract Terms Act. So you're then looking at, well, what does the tenancy say? And we saw in the Curo example, as I mentioned, it said we can add a new service if we think it's reasonable to do so. Now, I think where Curo caught a cold is they were then trying to adopt that as a unilateral variation. They consulted on it as they need to do. However, it was not a new service. So it became very technical on the terms of the tenancy agreement. What could they validly operate that clause when clearly they were already providing the service? And the upper tribunal said no, they couldn't. But it's very much down to the specific wording of that tenancy agreement. So I think what Curo should have done, of course, they've been stuck with the terms of that agreement, is probably rather than trying to introduce it unilaterally, they should have been trying to do it, produce it on a mutual basis. Because of course, if you get the agreements of both parties, if all parties agree, you can do whatever you like. If you're trying to do it scheme-wide, so you've only then consulting with or getting the agreement of a small number of tenants, it's much easier. If you're trying to do it stock-wide, it becomes extremely challenging. So I think you have to, first and foremost, you need to look at the terms of your tenancy agreement, and it very much becomes sort of fact specific. We produce, when we redraft tenancy agreements for clients, we'll certainly include clauses which provides a lot more flexibility. So it very much depends on what your contract says. The final bullet point on that was had a case where the specific client had been providing a service through a separate support agreement, and which had previously been funded through Supporting People. Supporting People funding had been removed, and so what we were seeking to do was to take the service that's being provided, which was things like hard wiring, caretaker provision, etc., taking it out of a separate support contract and adding it into the tenancy agreement, because it wasn't already provided for in the tenancy agreement, provided for in a separate support contract. Under the tenancy, it was a new service. And of course, the option for the residents was that if you don't agree to it going into the tenancy agreement, it will have to be withdrawn because our funding's disappeared. And so, of course, the tenants wanted to continue with the service and were happy to agree to sign an addendum to have it added into their contract. Next slide, please.
Clive, sorry, just before you move on, can I just ask a question about that then? So say you've got a general needs block of flats and it's a stock transfer, so traditionally they've had grounds maintenance and window cleaning.
And what are you? Are you a registered provider or local authority?
A registered provider, sorry.
Okay.
So obviously, you know, stock transfers across 3 regions. So if we went to a block of flats, to the residents and said, right, you know, the last 10 years you've had grounds maintenance, window cleaning, caretaking. We now want to introduce a charge for those services. I agree that I understand kind of about the tenancy agreements, but would that be an option then if people said, actually, we don't want your charges because, you know, we've had it for the last 10 years? Could we then say, well, the other option is us to stop providing those unless we can charge?
Yeah, I think you're looking at what the tenancy agreement says, and if it's a stock transfer, unfortunately, a lot of the local authority tenancy agreements, because they had the statutory power to vary, a lot of local authority tenancy agreements aren't, shall we say, fantastically worded. They often won't have a provision to enable things to enable a contractual variation, because as a local authority, they didn't need one. So they're absent of this contractual variation clause. Now, when it comes across from a local authority, you presumably would have issued a assured tenancy agreement, I presume. You'd have got them to sign up on a new agreement, would you, or they are still on their old secured?
To be honest with you, I think we've got a mixture. So I think, you know, we're a mixture of 3 kind of previous stock transfers now. So there'll be different arrangements in different regions. Although, you know, we now have a new kind of Taurus kind of assured short hold. Obviously, I need to look back at some of the historic ones. For me, it was just a question, you know, in terms of you supporting people, one to say, well, you know, unless we can deliver it, it can stop.
Yep. Well, because, and it could do that because there was no contractual provision in the tenancy agreement to provide that service.
Okay.
Because the service was mentioned in a separate support contract. So there was nothing within the tenancy agreement that said the service was going to be provided. So it was then it was using the unilateral variation clause that says we can add to, remove, reduce, vary the services provided following consultation with the tenants affected. You're using that provision to have a housing management consultation, which in fairness very much follows the Section 103 procedure, because that's kind of good practice. So the consultation was, look, this is what we want to do. We've got a separate support agreement. That's where the services sit. We want to bring these into the tenancy agreement for the first time. So these are being new services under the tenancy agreement. We're using the unilateral variation clause to bring it in. We're consulting with you about what the intention is, what the cost is going to be. Will it be coverable under housing benefit, universal credit? All that information was provided. And it was also, you know, if the alternative is the service has to stop. So that was mentioned as well. But we don't think it should stop because we think it's a very valuable service. But the alternative is that we don't provide it. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So if we're then adding into a new service, again, with the local authorities, it's absolutely easy peasy, lemony squeezy, because we've got the statutory variation mechanism under the Section 103 procedure, as I've mentioned. So again, absolutely plain sailing for a local authority. Registered providers, not as easy. Again, you've got to look at what your tenancy agreement says. Do you have that clause that has words to the effect of we can add, remove, reduce, vary the services provided following consultation with the tenants affected? That kind of unilateral variation clause, which only deals with the services under the tenancy agreement and not the kind of Peabody and Reeves wider clause. If the answer is yes, you do have one of those, then then you provide what we refer to as a housing management consultation to add the service. And as a matter of best practice, if you look at what section 103 says, follow that procedure, because that's the statutory procedure. So it's not a section 103 consultation by definition, because you're a registered provider, not a local authority, but you follow very much what the statute sets out. So that involves you writing to the tenants affected, giving them information, what you want to do, why you want to do it, what it's going to cost them. If they're in receipt of benefits, will it be covered by benefits or not? You've got to provide them with as much information as possible so that then so that their consultation becomes meaningful. You provide them with the opportunity to give you feedback on what you're proposing. Having done that, and the clause that says we can do this following consultation with the tenants affected, does not go on to say we can then only do it if we get a majority vote. So as long as you follow the procedure, you can add the charge whether the tenants agree or not. It provides you with that ability to vary your services for purposes of good housing management as a matter of contract. So then what happens if you do not have such a clause? As I said right at the very beginning, a fundamental principle of contract law is that you cannot unilaterally vary the terms of the contract. If there's not a contractual provision, then the only way is if it's mutually consented. So i.e. the tenants have to agree. Now I've got there sort of turkeys voting for Christmas, and what I mean by that is you're trying to get effectively the tenants to agree to spend more money. We want to add something that's going to cost you more money. Why would anyone agree voluntarily to spend more money? Well, the answer to that is, of course, is only as if the service is going to be desirable as far as the tenants are concerned. So, and I gave the example there of thinking about CCTV. If you've got an estate where there's been a rise in ASB and you want to introduce measures to combat ASB, one would hope, unless it was the tenants that were causing the ASB, of course, you would hope that the tenants would want to see better living conditions, may want or believe that the addition of these measures would be desirable, and so therefore may agree for the service to be added, and you would therefore need to get them to sign a tenancy variation, an addendum to their tenancy. Unless they sign, the service cannot be introduced.
That's really interesting, Clive, because we've been doing consultations with the new services that are desirable to tenants. We've done a consultation and applied to charge, but we haven't got them to sign a variation. So, yeah, that was a question I was going to ask earlier, so you've covered it. Thank you. I'm not sorry to admit that.
No, sure, no, not a problem. And that's the thing. If it hasn't been consented to, then the contract hasn't been varied. It can only be varied if they sign, if they agree to it.
So it doesn't stop you introducing the service, it stops you being able to recover the cost of the service if they haven't signed the addendum.
Yeah.
So if 100% of the people don't agree, you can still make a decision as a landlord, a housing management decision, to introduce a new service, but you're doing it in the knowledge that only some people you will only be able to recover some of the costs from those people who have agreed.
So Emma, just on the back of that then, so if you say you've got a scheme and you want to introduce a charge and you go through the whole consultation, so say 90% of the people agree to it and those 10% don't agree to pay an additional charge, so you can't just make them pay it anyway then? You can't just apply the charge?
No. Well,
not unless you've got that unilateral variation provision. If you haven't got that, then no, you provide the service in the knowledge that you'll only recover 90% of the cost.
But if
you've then got, of course, a very difficult balancing decision to make. Is it right that you charge the 90% that engage with you and the 10% that didn't engage get the same service but for free? because that's going to create real discourse amongst your tenants that, well, hang on, I seem to be getting penalised here. My neighbours are now getting this for nothing.
Which is why it's a housing management decision. Is it in your interest as a landlord to actually provide that service?
So obviously, but if we've got that unilateral variation clause, we can make those 10% people pay whether they want it or not.
Absolutely. Having followed that process of consultation, tell them what you're going to do and why and how much it's going to cost. Let them give you feedback, and then you can introduce it for everybody.
Thank you.
I think, Emma, over to you to tell us all about depooling. Which,
yeah, so a number of you have mentioned that your service charges are still pooled. So as Jackie explained, they're basically being covered by the rent. And obviously, the rent is set by a target rent formula, and you're able to collect service charges on top of that. So you're actually potentially depriving yourselves of income by providing services and charging for them on a pooled basis. So in order to be able to maximize your recovery, lots of organizations have looked to depool those service charges. So to depool successfully, you need to be understanding what services you're delivering to what properties. So it's about mapping what services are provided where. Where are you providing grounds maintenance? Which of your blocks have got a door entry system? Which of your blocks have got lifts, for example? So it's understanding across your stock what services you're providing. Then it's thinking about how services are delivered, because it's potentially you've got some external contractors, you may have a DLO delivering some of the services. So it's understanding the different mechanisms for service delivery. And it's also thinking about what level is services being provided for. So if you're maintaining a stair lift in somebody's individual property, that service is only being provided to that property. Other things like door entry systems could be provided to a block. And then you've got obviously things like in your housing for older people and extra care schemes, you could have communal lounges. So those services are being provided at scheme level, and others like grounds maintenance are being provided across whole estates. So it's thinking about the different levels that you're providing the services at. Obviously, very crucial to understanding this, and Jackie touched on it a bit earlier, is understanding how much it costs you to provide all of these services. And as people working in housing management, it may be that actually all that information sits with your finance people, and it's understanding from working with finance to understand how much it's going to cost you to provide those services. And then it's thinking about, if we're going to move away from this pooled approach, how are we actually going to charge the service charges? And that's thinking about how your IT can help you to actually introduce service charging going forward. And obviously, because you're going to be putting your service charges on top of the rent, you need to understand what's the impact of that on affordability for your tenants. So it's doing the financial modelling. Is that if we depool, obviously you can look at different approaches to, do you reduce the rent in the year that you depool by the amount you're going to depool? So if your rent is £80 and you work out your service charges are £5 a week, in year one, do you reduce your rent to £75 and then put the service charge on top? So in year one, they're not paying any more. And then gradually over time, obviously the rent increases and you continue to put your service charges on top. But what impact does that have on different groups of tenants, for example? So it's about modelling where the impact is likely to hit. And then having decided to go ahead, it's about doing things like developing policies and systems and procedures that enable you to operate a service charge regime, ideally, my view, a variable service charge regime, to allow you to be open and transparent and to maximise the recovery. And obviously, if you're going to depool, there will be a huge amount of consultation, and a lot of what you are able to do will come back to what we've already been talking about, is what does the tenancy agreement say? So understanding the tenancy agreement. And I'm trying to do this very quickly because we're running out of time, but that's one slide on a very big process. And it's then thinking about, have we got the resource internally to actually deliver and manage this process, to going from where we've just got a rent figure, which includes all of the service charges, to the rent figure plus all of the service charges, fully depooled and transparent on top of that. And I'm more than happy to have individual conversations with any of you about how the depooling process can work, because as I say, I went through that incredibly quickly. Does anyone have any questions on depooling? And because I'm presenting the screen, I can't see if anybody's got their hands up, so somebody else would need to tell me that.
Can't see any hands up, Emma.
Okay, thank you. So, Clive, back to you.
Back to me again, unmute. So switching from fixed to variable or vice versa. Local authorities, easy peasy, section 103. You can change anything following the section 103 procedure because statute provides that you can. So a doddle. Registered providers, this switching from fixed to variable, what you're trying to do is change a fundamental term in the tenancy agreement. Actually changing the mechanics. So this is not about changing the cash, this is changing how you do it. So unilateral variation clause we can add to remove, reduce, vary the services is not going to work. That's about adding a service, not changing how you do it. This is quite a fundamental term. So fundamental principle of contract law, you cannot unilaterally vary a contract. You can only be varied if the tenant agrees. So this involves effectively trying to draw them in. This is kind of like a hearts and minds consultation where you're trying to sell it to them that this is going to be a good thing. Now, switching from fixed to variable, in a way, is what you're doing is providing the tenants with more rights. By going to a variable service charge mechanics, you would be incorporating all of the provisions of sections 18 to 30 of the 85 Act. So they've got the right for section 20 consultation would apply. They've got a right to see accounts. All that protection would apply if they agreed. So you're trying to sell it to them. This is making it more transparent. This is a great thing for you because you get more rights. And it means that you only ever pay exactly what it costs us to provide the service. Whereas if you've got a truly fixed mechanics, if we overestimate what it's going to cost, we get to keep that surplus. But by going to variable, you would get a credit into the following accounting period. If the tenants, having explained all of that, say, no, we're not interested, hey, there's nothing you can do because you can't force it on them. Peabody and Reeves said it's an unfair contract term to have a unilateral variation that affects any terms of the tenancy. So you simply couldn't do it. And that's the same for the other way around, going from variable to fixed. You have to get the tenants to agree. If they don't agree, you can't do it. And of course, if you don't get 100% agreement, it means that the ones that have signed a variation would then be on the new service charge mechanics. The ones that refuse to sign or simply don't engage would then be on their old terms, and you could end up running both systems concurrently. So typically what RPs do if they want to try and go from fixed to variable or vice versa is carry out a straw poll. See what the uptake would be, and if they can get 100% uptake or near as, then they might decide, right, we'll proceed and we'll then start sending out the variations. But what they won't want to do is to have like a 50-50, because then you have the worst of both worlds. Paul, Paul from Guinness, Paul Connolly, you mentioned this case, and as you were talking about it, I thought, well, I know exactly what you're referring to here. Were you involved with this case, Paul?
No, it was just before I joined.
Just before you joined. Oh, fantastic. So you won't know anything about it. But what had happened in, so this is under the heading, what could possibly go wrong? So what had happened is that Mr. Wilcock, tenant of a flat under an assured short hold tenancy, the service charge mechanics provided that the service charge would be variable and reviewed annually when the net rent is reviewed. At the time, the service charge may be increased or decreased, and this will be done according to the costs incurred in the service charge period. Annually, the association would consult with tenants regarding the services provided. That was the contractual term. And as you very rightly said, there was an issue with fly tipping, and so they wanted to introduce a charge for bulk refuse removal because of all these people chucking rubbish and sofas on their estates. You had specified services which did not include the bulk refuse. So you had grounds maintenance, lighting stairwells, etc., but not this bulk refuse removal service. So what Guinness did was go through, say, right, okay, well, we'll use that clause, variable and reviewed annually. We're going to use that clause to add in a bulk refuse removal charge. And so they did. So they added it in. Mr. Wilcock challenged the charge to the first tier tribunal. The first tier tribunal said Guinness were entitled to charge for services in addition to those specified in the original tenancy agreement. So at the FTT, Guinness won. Mr. Wilcock appeals to the upper tribunal. And at the upper tribunal, the question becomes whether the provision of the tenancy agreement allowed Guinness to charge for this additional service. Sadly, the upper tribunal held, no, it wasn't. The upper tribunal said that referencing to the tenancy agreement that the service charge was variable only referenced the cash, only referenced how much could be charged for those specified services, and it did not entitle Guinness to add to the services. Yeah, purely about the contractual terms, the contract did not allow them to add a new service. The cautionary tale there is the contract is king. You always have to look at your contractual provisions and make sure your contractual provisions allow for any variation, and then you follow the variation procedure within the terms of your contract.
So that concludes our presentation, if you like. And so we just open up the remaining time to any questions on anything we've covered or anything we haven't covered.
So I was just going to ask, so Clive, does that support your earlier point made in regards to the vagueness? If there had been no specified charges, the position would have been stronger there of the landlord.
Yeah, but perversely enough, yes. I've seen, if you look at the terms of a lease, for example, a lease won't say we're going to provide you with bulk refuse removal, we're going to provide you with X, Y, and Z. It will often have a very broadly drawn out service charge mechanics, and it won't specify the individual things. It'll be very, very widely drawn, and so it provides a lot more flexibility for the landlord to recover the cost of providing any of the services because the lease is so widely drawn. With tenancy agreement, and I've drafted tenancy agreements that will have a very, almost like a lease style service charge mechanics. So it encompasses anything that the landlord does. That very often what you'll see is provisions that will say, we can recover our costs for the following services, and then the housing officer at the point of sign up scribbles manuscript in a box. And it's when that happens and they forget something, and it's not being specified in the contract, where difficulties very frequently arise. So it's down to
ours has just been varied, and it's very broad. It just says we will charge, but it does mention the word new. And I know that they were looking to start charging for a variety of charges that we don't currently charge for, that have been in our gift, if you like, and that, even though I'm a local authority, am I right in thinking that we'd still be captured by that, or could we rely on the 106 or whatever it was?
103.
103.
Yeah. So the section 106 is a reference to the Town and Country Planning Act. Section 103 is reference to the Housing Act 1985. And as a local authority, Parliament has given you the power to change your tenancy agreement by following that section 103 procedure.
Brilliant. So it doesn't matter what's in there, we can vary by following that.
Do what you like. Yep.
Fab. Great.
Emma, can you close down the slides and then you can see everybody?
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. it's in relation to kind of COVID, really. So obviously since March, you know, we've had to close down kind of communal lounges and sheltered schemes. We, you know, on some blocks where we've reduced kind of cleaning and caretaking services. So residents are now asking us whether they would see a reduction in their service charges because of that. On some schemes, we've provided additional kind of spot cleaning, in particular our sheltered schemes. So we would argue there's not been like a break in service because we've done it in a different way. But in particular, the use of communal lounges, residents are saying, well, we've not been able to use that lounge, so do we get that service charge back?
I would say that what you are proposing is actually the right approach. Where I work at Astor, we've done exactly the same thing. We're not cleaning the communal lounges, but actually we're spending the same amount of time at the scheme cleaning. It's just we're cleaning different things. And it's making, you know, it's about being able to evidence that. So it's looking at more regular cleaning of touch points and those sorts of things in the communal areas with the lounge mothballed. So I think that what you're suggesting is perfectly okay.
Can I ask a question? If you notice that you've been recovering a service charge that hasn't been provided, how far should we go back to look into refunding the tenant? Is there any rules on that?
Well, there is. If it's a tenancy agreement, the statutory limitation is 6 years. But of course, you know, if you've been wrongly charged for 6 years and I move into the scheme last week, I don't get someone else's 6 years refunds. So it can only go back as far as the tenant's actually been a resident. The statutory limitation is 6 years. I have, however, known of organisations that will then be making longer refunds out of a feeling of good governance and fairness. If a tenant had been overcharged for a period of longer than 6 years, it is a matter for you as to whether you then felt, well, we're going to trouser the additional cash. I would hazard a guess that it probably wouldn't be very nice as a registered provider and a regulated body to say, well, although we know we've got it wrong for longer than 6 years, we're not going to make any refunds. But in answer to your question, the rules are statutory limitation 6 years.
Thank you, Clive. That's what we've kind of been doing, so that's good to hear.
But it's, you know, but I say people that weren't there don't get the benefit of somebody else's money.
Yeah.
So if there's, and with tenancies, there tends to be quite a high churn. Where this has happened, organisations have then tried to track down the tenants that maybe had been overcharged. They'll try and have record the efforts that they've made, and will then ring fence the money should that tenant come back to them over, up until that 6 year limitation.
Thank you. So going back to getting the tenant to agree to the charge, the additional charge. So for example, they've had a new adaptation and it requires servicing, and we said we'll put that on our servicing contract that you have to agree to this additional charge. At the moment, we're just getting their agreement to it, written agreement to it, but we're not getting them to sign a variation to the tenancy agreement. Is that something we should 100% do with those that we've done that to?
It is, again, as a matter of contract law, an oral agreement is as binding as a written agreement. If I go into the shops and buy a pint of milk, I never sit there and sign a 3-page contract and hand it over before I get my bottle of milk. It's all done orally. Yeah, and that is just as enforceable. The difficulty is that it's harder to evidence. So if you're doing it all verbally, what's to stop Mrs. Miggins down the line or Mr. Miggins down the line saying, well, I never agreed that? How are you then going to evidence that they did if they're flatly denying it in the future? So having it agreed in writing stops that from happening. So my advice would be get them to agree in writing, and then there's no question as to, well, what was the variation? Was it, it's much easier to evidence it if it's in writing. So get it evidenced in writing.
So I can feel more assured that if we've got an email or a letter from the tenant confirming that they're happy with the additional charge as per our consultation, that's acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, if they've agreed and they've emailed, then yeah, you're having that. It's being evidenced there. I would still suggest, because if they're writing an email saying yes, it's fine, then why not send them a document, addendum of tenancy, hereby notice of variation as per clause da-de-da, and then you set out what the new term is going to be. They sign it, scan it, send it back. They've also then got a copy that they can append to their tenancy agreement. Should they, for example, do a mutual exchange, the person that's coming in knows what the terms they're agreeing to. Because otherwise, if they do a mutual exchange, how's the other person going to know? Because they won't have access to that email.
And just one final question about eligible and non-eligible charges.
Yep.
Is there somewhere where I can easily find what is eligible and what isn't eligible?
From a universal credit perspective, the guidance for landlords that was published by the government back in 2012 is still the relevant document. For housing benefit, it's looking at the housing benefit regulations, but as a general rule of thumb, from a housing benefit perspective, if it's a personal charge, i.e. support or it's personal heating or personal water, then it won't be eligible. If it's in relation to your accommodation, it probably will be eligible. But that is a very broad brush, but the housing benefit regulations are also available on the .gov website.
My answer was going to be, in answer to the strict question, is there somewhere simple I can look? My answer was going to be no, it's not. The regulations are impenetrable.
The housing benefit regulations are fairly impenetrable. The universal credit guidance for landlords is reasonably straightforward, to be fair.
We've got that new impact on UC as well with disabled tenants. That's recently come out this week. What's the advice from you guys on that?
In terms of disabled adaptations?
I think, bear with me, I haven't read enough into it. I just got quickly alerted earlier in the week about...
As a general rule, if you've got, say, a stair lift in a property and you are charging for the maintenance of that stair lift, that has always been eligible for housing benefit. What changed with the move to universal credit is universal credit specifically exempts the maintenance of adaptations from the eligible charges.
Thanks, Jack.
The theory is that the higher rate PIP should be funding that, not universal credit. As I say, the theory is.
Have we got any further questions? Well, I think
Yes,
that's...
thank you.
Thank you all for attending. I think that's... Our time is up, as they say.
Well, we've overrun a little, in fact.
We've overrun, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Bobby, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jackie. I was just gonna say from a big thanks to Jackie and Emma and Clive. That was a really useful discussion, and I think that's been evident through the questions that we've come through and the richness of the content. I think David's just summed it up by saying we could probably do 2 full days on service charges, and there's loads more to cover and loads more questions. So it may be something that if people want, we can revisit some of this later in the year or delve into some more specifics. But we'll send some feedback round and the slides round after this. But yeah, just again, big thank you to Jackie, to Emma, and to Clive for taking the time to come and talk to us today. And we'll be in touch with everybody soon ahead of our next session in a couple of months' time. So thanks again, everybody, for attending.
And I'm right in thinking, Bobby, that the slides will get distributed?
Slides, yeah, as said, the Clives will send the slides round on the back of this. If you're all right with the details of Jackie, Emma, and Clive, if people want to get in touch direct or pick up any specifics on the back of these conversations. So Beth can help facilitate that.
And on the slides, I mean, there should be my contact details on the back of the slides. So if anyone wishes to get in contact on any of the issues that we've discussed today, or on my presentation, then please do. My contact details will be on the slides.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, and yeah, we'll see you again in a couple of months for the next Estates Services Club session. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks, bye.
Bye.